My name is Marianne Marino, and I will be co-moderating the discussion tonight about On the Record with my dear friend and professor of creative writing and marginalized voices in dystopian literature at the College of Southern Nevada. Erica Vital-Lazare, in addition to being an incredible writer, is the editor of the forthcoming novel of the diaspora, and it's a series of revisiting classic Black works in literature, and it's going to be published by McSweeney Press. I am a longtime, lifelong producer in the entertainment industry and a sometimes executive. Most recently, I was the head of production at Amazon Studios, and 2 years ago left and co-founded Resonance Content, where my partner and I make feature films. So we are really grateful to be here tonight. We want to thank HBO Max and PEN America for setting up this two-part conversation about the documentary On the Record. HBO Max and PEN America, are put this together so that we could really talk about the film from the point of view of journalism in filmmaking. And PEN America is an organization that unites writers and their allies to celebrate creative expression and to defend the liberties that make that possible. So it's a really exciting sort of intersection of missions, I think. So we'll be speaking tonight with Kirby Dick and Amy Ziering, who are Oscar nominated and two-time Emmy-winning investigative filmmakers whose most recent projects directly impacted American politics and culture and legislation, resulting in real world change on the ground. Their collective filmography has led to 5 congressional hearings and over 35 policy reform laws, which is incredible, passed in Congress. They've been sweeping reform policies at hundreds of institutions, products removed from shelves, and national discussions sparked. Sheri Sher is an author, rapper, and founder of the first female DJ and rap group Mercedes Ladies. And Drew Dixon is a record producer who has collaborated with John Legend, Estelle, Kanye West, Whitney Houston, Santana, Mary J. Blige. She's a writer and a silence breaker. So welcome, everybody. We're so thrilled to be able to be here tonight with you and to have this conversation about this film. I'm a huge fan of your work and really feel grateful to both of you for continuing to make it. So we thought, since this is a PEN hosted event with HBO Max, we thought we'd start on the theme of free speech. PEN is, as far as I know, it's the largest free speech organization in the world. And without the First Amendment, films like On the Record might never be made in this country. But in the case of this film, free speech, freedom of speech carries something of a double meaning, I think. And while we're constitutionally protected in our rights to express our truths openly, Drew, Sheri, Sil Lai, and the 17 other women who've come forward about Russell Simmons's sexual misconduct didn't feel free to speak openly at the time of the incidents. And this self-censorship is a tension that victims of sexual assault have faced throughout history at the hand of cultures which didn't protect or support them. So how do you feel that as documentarians rooted in a journalistic approach to your filmmaking, think that the First Amendment as a right helped you, or did it help you navigate that insidious nature of the voice inside of the subjects that didn't feel free to speak?
Well, I mean, one of the things that helped us is it made us feel free to put their voices, you know, in our film without fear of lawsuits, right? I mean, there are other countries where it's much easier to sue journalists, to sue investigative filmmakers. And here the protections are much stronger. And obviously in all the films we do, we work very closely with attorneys and First Amendment attorneys. And you know, I'm just continually grateful that those protections exist, because, you know, without that, powerful people that we go up against and, you know, and journalists go up against could really decimate those reporters and those filmmakers. So that protection, you know, I welcome every day.
Which is why you're now seeing, because they can't kneecap the press in that way, you're now seeing that truth itself is being attacked, you know, so that it's being undermined. We have the legal protections, but now they're undermining sort of, you know, ideologically the entity of truth itself. And, you know, so that's the new frontier, and that's really terrifying in America.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that was something actually we were interested in hearing from you about, because we're in this incredibly terrifying moment where you know, media can be anything, right? And so how, like, you know, how are you confronting that as true journalistic filmmakers?
Well, I think to some degree the same way Biden is trying to move forward as if it doesn't exist, right? I think in some ways, I think his strategy has been very good, not to engage, you know, Trump and his attempt to, you know, discredit the entire election. And that's the way we try to proceed as well, is that one of the things we do, for example, is we try to avoid presenting things in very partisan ways, like it's a Democratic perspective, you know, Democrat perspective or a Republican perspective is. And so we try to avoid a lot of that noise and come at it from a different perspective.
From the perspective of the truth, simply like a factual crime. Okay, here's what happened. You know, you don't need to be a feminist. You know, you just need to be a human being. You know, we all can agree, you know, that these crimes should not be permitted. And why does our culture not only permit them, but aids and abets them, you know, wittingly and unwittingly? You know, we're all complicit, you know, from embedded racism to, you know, overt, you know, turning a blind eye if the institution is one you want to, you know, be able to advance in, so you don't want to say anything. So, you know, that's kind of how we approach it. And we try and do it, as Kirby said, in a nonpartisan way to avoid partisan warfare. But I mean, you're really hitting at such an interesting question, right? I mean, your question was so sort of rich. I mean, yes, we are, and anyone watching this, and Penn, thank God, I mean, we have been so, I mean, we're realizing the last 4 years how spoiled we've been and fortunate we've been to be in a country that, you know, up until recently, really, it wasn't a question of the rights of journalists weren't under attack, you know, and now it is a really scary time. And so we're grateful we're still able to get funding. The fear I have, though, is also that now that, you know, the streamers are getting more consolidated, the power of the streamers is getting more consolidated, and they're all chasing the same algorithms. You know, how much of an appetite, you know, as streaming becomes more of entertainment driven and algorithm driven, you know, will there be for really hard hitting investigative pieces? You know, that's a question, you know, that's looming large in my mind.
But yeah, just to give a shout out to HBO Max, they did jump into this. I mean, you know, this was a project that a lot of that might not have been the easiest project to pick up, and they did, and they've stood by and really supported it. So, I mean, you know, as filmmakers, you know, we just really appreciate that. You never really know when you're coming to a project and you're selling a project independently, which we were at the time we went to Sundance with this. You just don't know who and why and what the politics are behind it. And you know, on an executive level, they've been 100% supportive. So we just wanted to add that.
No, a huge, as much as I'm terrified, a huge thanks and infinite gratitude to HBO Max, you know, and I hope they continue to have the courage and vision and leadership that they've exhibited, which is really incredible. You know, I'm not saying that, you know, that's.
Yeah. Well, I think that your sort of the truth will out tack seems, I mean, I know we're in a new era, but you've made so many films now, and they have broken through with different distributors. So it does feel like the Truthful Out tack does lead your voices to find the viewers that want to hear them, right? And really have led to like incredible reform, which I think is powerful. I do though want to get back to I do want to get back to self-censorship. Like, I mean, and maybe, and this is kind of a two-part question. So maybe that kind of wasn't happening because by the time, you guys and Drew had decided to do this project together, and Sil Lai and Sheri and everybody had gotten involved, they'd already made the choice to go ahead and speak. But I'm curious about that trajectory, how it came together, how you sort of how all the pieces fell together. And if there was any sort of a dance or resistance or maybe question about pivoting away from, going forth with making the film.
Well, for those that have seen the film deals with that question head on. I mean, the one of the big thematic, plots of the film is whether Drew is going to come forward and talk to the New York Times or not. And that is actually, that was a completely real storyline. I mean, we met Drew before she had decided if she was going to speak in public, and she gave us the privilege of following her on that journey. But when you said, how do we navigate that? I mean, we are survivor first and survivor forward, and we sort of follow the same thing that physicians do, first do no harm. So honestly, we walk the walk. And when we met Drew, we said, look, your journey is your journey. We don't want to influence it in any way, shape, or form. We would love to have the opportunity and the privilege of following you, but no pressure, like don't sign a release. We'll only show up with your, when you're okay, for the length of time you're okay, and we'll leave. And if we show up and you change your mind, 100% fine. And that's literally how the film was crafted. And, Drew will come on and tell you this. And she didn't decide for, I think, well after she went forward to the New York Times, and then maybe it took another year for her actually to give us a release and say, I'm okay with, you using this footage and starting to work with it. So that's kind of how we proceed. It's really very, it's non-exploitive, and it's really sincere. I don't want to lose sleep at night, that I ever hurt anyone or cause them any more pain. Everyone we've talked to that goes through these experiences have been through enough. So that's kind of what I say when I sit down. And we both really, really sincerely mean it. And I think that kind of respect, forming that kind of safe space, that's sincere, I think has allowed us to have these kind of craft the kind of films that we are able to make and get people to share and feel safe sharing things that they might not be that comfortable sharing otherwise.
Wow. So I did realize we were on that journey with Drew when I watched the film, but that's really interesting to have that insight that there was no guarantee ultimately, right, that footage was ever going to end up in the film, in which case there was no guarantee ultimately that you'd even have a film on your hands.
Yeah, we were on hiatus often with Drew. I mean, we didn't know, so we'd stop and we'd work on a different project, and then she'd resurface and say it's okay. I mean, it was really, so yeah. And there was, she'll tell you, there was no pressure throughout. I mean, we just, we understood, we do understand. I mean, we've made several films in this arena, and it's you don't come out the same, and you really do, understand. It's not an easy decision for anybody, and it's not something you want to in any way influence someone to do. Everyone has their own journey to do, and whatever journey that is, it's the right one for them.
I wanted to thank you all for making this film, but I also want to congratulate you on being shortlisted for the Doc NYC Award in Features. That's a huge honor. That's often the path to what. No. I won't evoke it. But I also wanted to ask you, Black men and women as creatives and as consumers of media, we have this distinct experience of bearing intimate witness to one another's pains and the way in which what Bell Hooks calls this white supremacist capitalist patriarchy can undo us. I mean, so when you go in to investigate, give voice to issues in this community, there's also this added layer of protection that your subjects, and Drew spoke of it, Joan Morgan spoke of it. So many of us feel protective over issues that are so close to identity. How did you, Amy and Kirby, you're not of the culture directly. How did you trust yourselves enough to get in the middle of this conversation? And how did Sarah Newens trust herself in, so beautifully and seamlessly editing those conversations? How did you bridge that distance?
Well, I just want to say, and I'll turn it over to Amy, but a lot of listening, years of listening is really, I think, was at the core of it. And Amy, do you want to just describe how it came?
Yeah, and I want to thank you, Erica, for shout out to Sarah Newens. I mean,
Yeah.
Absolute poet master. I mean, the film is truly, we're here, but it was a collaborative effort with everybody. A shout out to Amy Hurdy, Jamie Rogers. I mean, it really is a collective effort, and we're just the front pieces, which actually is an answer to your question. So it was on, it wouldn't have been our place to have made this film. We met Drew when we were making just sort of a broad project that was looking at women in different industries. That's the very inception of this.
Who were assaulted.
Who were assaulted. And we were looking, the working title was sort of toxic labor. It was in the wake of Me Too, right? That was sort of
I mean, we were going into Silicon Valley, we were looking to Wall Street, animation, obviously all of Hollywood. It was very broad. Actually, even going into farm workers,
restaurant
workers, just a very wide range that we were looking into.
And in the course of that exploration, we were casting this wide net. We did this interview with Drew. And I remember after we did this interview, it was in a house in Brooklyn. I was doing about 5 interviews a day for a week. It was super intense, women from all different. And after the Drew interview, I mean, I turned around and 3 of the crew members were crying. And I called Kirby and I said, this woman has like the most extraordinary story and she really doesn't know what she's doing. Let's just, like, maybe we should just keep in touch and follow her and see where it goes. So that was sort of, we didn't ever have an initial idea of making this. And then in the course of following Drew, we ended up getting a deal with Oprah Winfrey to sort of produce this series. And we ended up showing her the footage, just some footage that we cut together of Drew. And it was her, she said, oh my God, we should do this. This should be, either part of the series or a film in its own right, and let's move forward. So that gave us the feeling with her, and she's an extremely active collaborator, and she was throughout, extensive notes from her and her team. In fact, she so loved the cut that she called John Legend and asked him to do an end credits song. So she was incredibly part and parcel to everything, and it wouldn't be what it is without her. So it was that which made us feel safe and empowered. And then, as Kirby said, we listened. And as you'll see, and Drew and Sheri will explain, what you see on screen is their voices telling you their story. And we also really got incredible guidance and insight from Dr. Joan Morgan, from Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, from Shanita Hubbard, from Kierna Maya, who are all incredibly brilliant women, legends in their own right, not well recognized in mainstream white culture, unfortunately, but super respected and authorities. So it was basically that collaboration is what you see on screen.
You have this survivors first, survivor forward sort of philosophy. Is that something that you crafted together between the two of you in your work in previous investigative stories that you've brought to us?
Yeah, I would say so, definitely. I mean, it was sort of, yeah. I mean, that's an interesting question. No one's ever asked that, but definitely. I mean, we do this from a place of passion, and I think of our films as kind of love letters. And it's just like falling in love with these people and just wanting to do good by them, and when you have that as your core mission, everything else falls into place. You don't want to hurt anybody. It's not exploitive. It's not mean-spirited. It's not, we really honestly, I mean, I think with Hunting Ground, we had a character who very late decided she didn't want to be in it after a lot of work. And that was fine, which was it was really difficult after you've crafted something, but, and yeah. And another beautiful thing that we found and had is often we get letters, when you do these kind of films, Erica, you often talk to a lot of people and not everyone ends up in the film, right? And I've been always moved by people who write to me afterwards and said, you probably don't remember me, but you interviewed me for X. And, I'm so, and I saw the film and I'm not in it, but I just want to thank you because that interview was so cathartic for me and so helped me in my healing journey, and it was just so meaningful to just be heard and seen, So, I mean, that's that's the joy of the work we do.
Yeah, well, really, I mean, that empathy really comes through in all of your films and very powerfully in this one. It was interesting to hear. So you were kind of on a path to making a broader film in terms of the subjects and the industries you were covering in the wake of the Me Too movement. And I think we're all thankful, right, to Tarana Banks and the Me Too movement for creating this powerful platform for open discussions about the abuses really in the entertainment industry, and I'm glad, for one, and I think many of us are, that the entertainment centric movement has reached out beyond the media sector into agriculture and other businesses to give voice to women who've been violated or abused or overlooked in these various industries in our culture. But that said, bringing celebrity voices to issues, as we all know, can sometimes and often create backlash, and we're seeing that more and more. And I'm curious if you think, I think about it all the time, like, what are the ways that we in the entertainment industry can sort of forge new pathways to use our reach, right? To lean into our reach to audiences and people across the country, around the world, really, to give voice to these issues without that risk of backlash? Like, how can we do that in a way that doesn't turn off viewers?
Well, I actually think, there's a lot to criticize the entertainment. You can criticize a lot of things about the entertainment business and about Hollywood, and there's a long history of that. I've certainly made a film on it, but I think, credit has to be given to the entertainment business for being very much at the forefront of the Me Too movement. I mean, I would not have predicted that. I would have predicted it would have come from somewhere else. And it has obviously come from somewhere else. This has been building for a long time. So, the survivors in the entertainment business, some of whom are, very privileged and very, celebrities, like you say, have stepped up, and obviously they're in a much more protected position, and this critique has been examined. But I also think that credit has to be given for them to take that step, because even there is backlash, and maybe the most powerful can weather it. But we've interviewed many women in the entertainment business who have come forward post Me Too and experienced a lot of backlash. So even in the business, support has to be given, I think. I think for nearly every person, every man and woman coming forward, there's a great risk, and oftentimes they pay a price. And so it's so important that everyone supports survivors coming forward.
But also, if I can add to that, and taking off of the Erica's Bell Hooks quote, it's important to know that the entertainment industry is part of a white patriarchal racist paradigm, and we've seen that, look at, and I think that if you want the entertainment industry to change, that has to radically change. Like, get over yourself. Don't have the mentality of a just for 50-year-old 60-year-old white male executives, and only have women look a certain way and men look a certain way, and only cast, you know, predominantly white people in roles, and have this sort of same ridiculous patriarchal narratives and rape mythology promulgated in every single, you know, it's our culture is, you know, impoverished because of the, all, you know, the ideology in most of our mainstream media. So, I mean, yes, I totally agree with Kirby, and, you know, it has been surprising and heartening to see, but, you know, square one is look at our narratives. You know, I was just watching Broadchurch, like random, you know, I don't usually watch television, but just like they actually cast people that look like people. And that was like radical. I haven't seen that. I'm like, oh my God, you know, and these people are, you know, just normal people who are over the age of 18 are seen as, you know, sexual beings and attractive. And it's not, you know, you don't do a double take. I shouldn't be 58 and seeing that for the first time.
Yeah. And I mean, I think a lot that, you know, does it start with more equity and leadership within the industry structure, or is a more radical paradigm shift what's called for, right? Should the structure that exists, the hierarchies, be totally dismantled and rethought?
Well, it's supposed to be an imaginative industry. It doesn't show a whole lot of imagination. Just start exercising that, like, you know, and, you know, responsible, you know, just real, I mean, yeah, I don't even like the word diversity because it implies that, right, diverse from what, you know, like just reflect, you know, grow up.
Right. And find stories that are singular and specific, maybe. Um,
Well, I also think that that's one of the roles of art too. I mean, that's, I mean, as an artist, you have to find ways to do that, to confront, you know, sort of established paradigms. I mean, that's constantly something that, you know, I think, you know, all writers, you know, filmmakers, artists, you know, have to do. I mean, it's, you know, you're constantly up against this. It's sort of a wind that you're going up against that can push you. You know, it's part of the dynamic of making art. It's part of the dynamic of looking at art, of understanding art. I mean, it's not, you know, I mean, this cultural pressure that Amy's referring to is it seeps through all of us. It's internal too. So it's a continual struggle. I mean, you know, you find yourself being caught up in it, being a party to it, and then, you know, how do you negotiate that? You know, there's a lot of, I think it's important to have this continual reflection of your sort of, you know, how you're implicated in this as well.
So is that the aim of your documentary work as well, is to recode the narrative for those who are on the inside and those who are on the outside? Just start to break down some of those chambers that have been filled with rape culture, with racism, classism. Just break into those chambers.
Yeah, I mean, I would say yes to that. I mean, we're very conscious that we, you know, that there are these paradigms that exist, and how our films can potentially land to impact that. I mean, we don't just make films to make films and to try to make good films, which we do. We understand that they're going to land in culture in a certain way, and we think a lot about that, about not only that, you know, we're making something that's, I guess you could say, is a reflection of us in some way, but also is going to resonate within the culture, within society, and what is our responsibility and how we're going to craft that and how we're going to support it after it comes out. I mean, not only support the survivors, and the survivors, of course, support us too. I mean, it's a very much, I do want to say that documentary filmmaking and working with subjects and survivors is a very collaborative enterprise. I mean, it's not, you know, it's as much or more in many ways as Drew's and Sheri's films as it is ours. But also we are very interested in how this film affects the entire culture and affects survivors around the country as well. You know, giving a platform, giving a place that they can feel safer to come out because they've seen survivors come out and be supported.
So yeah, I would say yes, like Kirby said, we do, and Erica, like you asked, want to give a space and voice to people whose voices aren't heard and marginalized. At the same time, our hands are somewhat tied and constricted because we are part of this culture. Because when you were talking, it made me sadly think that in all our films, you know, you'll notice our films end up being reflections, right? So Hunting Ground, you know, I remember a lot of Asian women came up to me and said, why aren't there Asian, you know, more Asian voices in Hunting Ground? And I said, because I interviewed them and then they just didn't feel safe culturally coming forward. You know, it wasn't our fault. I would have loved to put them in the film, but our culture and their culture, you know, they have to abide by those self-censorships still, unfortunately. You know, that's, so when, you know, you're saying that, or look at on the record, you know, we absolutely wanted to highlight light privilege because, you know, as the women in the film articulate, it's not an accident that many of them have lighter skin because they felt at least they had that margin, a little more degree of safety coming forward. So our film ends up participating in that. That makes sense, you know, because the culture is at a space where that's the only people that feel empowered, but we're making inroads.
And it's also the kind of self-examination that I was talking about. That's what Amy is doing right now, you know, is that you have to look, you're constantly in a push and pull. You're not above it. You're not in a pure position of commentary. You're a part of the culture and part of all the reactionary aspects of that culture, even as you're trying to address it.
Right.
So complex, really.
The only way out is through. I mean, there's no, I mean, you know, it's just you constantly, you know, it's life.
Right. You know, there was a question I had when I watched the film, and I felt this actually watching, I think, all of your films, but I really felt this because of the layers that you were uncovering, that complexity that you just articulated, and that sort of participation in the culture and in the narrative while experiencing it was an awful lot to bear emotionally. And I'm curious, how do you hold that space? How do you hold it day after day, month after month, for, you know, the years often that it takes to make a film like this? How do you do that? How do you nourish yourselves and nourish your subjects in a way that you can kind of keep it up?
I mean, that's an interesting question. I don't like to, I mean, all I'll say is the fact that I don't have a 1-degree relationship to sexual assault. But having made all these films, I got PTSD. So the only reason I say and share that, you know, what's called secondary PTSD,
right,
is because if I, who have no first relationship to this trauma, gets it simply from hearing stories, and if so many women, what is it, 1 in 3 in our culture and globally, are victims, all of those women have it. All of the people around them, right, are responding to their trauma and end up, just look at what a traumatized culture we are. Like, I just use that as an instructive point, is what I'm trying to say. Like, if I can get it that way, let us imagine empathically how different our world could look if we took this crime seriously and, you know, just stopped protecting predators. Like, it would be unrecognizable. You know, that's how much, and so that's why, you know, so I don't have an answer. I mean, it's hard, you know, and I just have empathy for people that do this kind of work day in and day out, and thank God that we can go in and out of projects. And, you know, you don't come out the same, is the truth, but it's not about me. It's really, it just gives me more and more fury and passion and compassion for all the people that experience this firsthand.
Well, listening to you, you know, I can really understand why the subjects of your film do put so much trust in you. It's a, you know, it's a very powerful level of emotional intelligence and responsibility that that you're bringing through, and I think that, you know, we're all really fortunate that you guys are going into those trenches.
I feel it's been a privilege working with Kirby. I mean, I don't know many men that make radically feminist films, you know, and stick with it. I mean, so, you know, I mean, I have he always criticizes me for my metaphors. I'm going to say I have a dog in the race. I don't know why I think that's an expression. He says it's not. It's an expression, but, you know, I'm, you know, an innate, you know, but I mean, I don't know many men that would do this and do it the way he does, and push, you know, each film to be better and better and more rigorous and more powerful and more impactful. And so I just, you know, I don't think he gets enough credit. But so, and thank you for saying that. And then can I just say, I don't know why, it's like the Zoom, but you do feel also, right? I mean, it breaks my heart, honestly, that we had to, I mean, that, you know, Russell Simmons is, I wish we didn't have to have, you know, a person of color be, you know, that was a struggle for me in making the film, and still is, you know, and so, and, you know, that's, again, you know, so what, you know, what harm are we doing, you know?
One thing Drew says is that the alternative is not to protect the Black women who experienced the trauma. So I understand the struggle in exposing someone whom has been revered.
Yeah.
You know, I understand that you're torn, you know, that we're all torn when we hear that our gods have these feet of clay. But yes, on the other side of that is the opportunity for women to voice what has happened at the feet of these gods, so that we can see that they're only human, and maybe there's something other than human that needs to be unveiled. So thank y'all for doing that work.
Well, thank these women. Thank you, and thank these women for having the courage. I mean, my God, right? I don't know that I would, honestly. It wasn't easy.
It has been, you know, it's always a privilege to work with survivors. I mean, not only, I mean, it's not just telling their story, it's how they understand their story. I mean, the reason we went in this direction with the film initially was that Drew just took us into that. She had thought about these issues so deeply and communicated them so clearly that it just sort of drew us in, and, you know, and so it's really what you're saying is, you know, their meditation. It's really their meditation that you're seeing and not ours. We're just trying to find a way to present it. You know, we're sort of, but and that, you know, and that's really exciting to be able to work with someone like Drew and like Sheri and Sil Lai, who've thought through this for so long. And are sharing both their very personal and painful experience, but also their very analytical understanding of it. And it's a very rich to be engaged in that kind of dialogue, you know, for years in the process of making the film. So we are very grateful.
Yeah, I mean, and that's so clear. And it's actually a beautiful segue, because we're, you know, into this transition moment where we're going to speak to them next. But yes, they are so articulate on very deep levels, and it's rich, it's powerful. I mean, I'm thinking about that moment when Drew speaks about, well, when we say it, it's on our tongue, right? That sort of awful thing is coming out of us, and so it sort of hangs with them rather than with, you know. It's a powerful moment. I think even in that moment you cut to Anita Hill during that segment, and it really shook me.
Yeah. No, you're sullied by articulating the crime.
Yeah, exactly.
If you speak it, then it's on your lips, and then everyone's appalled by you, you know. Describing the act.
That was such a radical insight that she gave us. So, all right, well then we're going to take this moment to transition. So for everybody who's joined us, and we're so happy you're here, we're going to move on now to speak with Sheri and Drew. And for those of you that might have been sitting in front of a Zoom all day, we're going to give you an opportunity to do a quick 7th inning stretch. We'll just take like a 1 minute, minute and a half break, and then we'll meet back here in front of the.
And I just want to do my activist thing. Everybody who saw it, please tell everybody to watch the film. It's on HBO Max. It's so important. That's a political act, honestly. We want these voices heard and amplified. So if you were moved, please just take a minute and write an email to someone. Thank you.
Absolutely. I got my mom to watch it.
Thank you.
And thank you for this conversation.
Thank you both. Yeah, this was great and really interesting and different. And appreciate it, and appreciate everybody who out there. We can't see you, but thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to think about this issue. It's important.
All right, great. So we'll see each other back here in a minute or two.
Yeah.
So we're back from our break, and oh yay! There's Sheri and Drew. Hi.
Hi. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Well, it's great to be here with you guys. I'm gonna do, just for anybody who might have joined late, I'm Marianne Marino. I'm a producer, former studio executive. I'm here with Erica Vital-Lazare, who's a professor and incredible writer. And we're in a conversation now with Sheri Sher, who's an author, rapper, and the founder of the first female DJ and rap group, Mercedes Ladies. Yeah. And Drew Dixon, who's a record producer, who's collaborated with John Legend, Estelle, Kanye West, Whitney Houston, Santana, Mary J. Blige. Drew is a writer and a silence breaker. So if you missed that intro before, you got it now. So we're so really appreciative to have been invited to have this conversation with the both of you.
Thank you for
having us. Thank you.
I feel like I'm in the presence of hip hop royalty.
Queen. I definitely feel like that whenever I'm with Sheri Sher. That's for sure.
Thank you. I'm in honor, like Drew already know. Like it's really an honor, actually, and that's the honor of hip hop history and things and groundbreaking things that needed to be addressed. And I'm so honored that I got that platform to do this.
Well, we know that this film is centered around trauma and centered around trauma from a very particular place of power. But what I also found so valuable about On the Record is that it acknowledges how Black women shape the music, shape the culture, shape the genre. And it establishes in real time this sort of covalent relationship between Black men and Black women, as in the civil rights movement, right? It being a shared movement, progress coming out of the hands of Black women who are part of that movement. And it seems that relationship is deeply romanticized. I'm gonna take you back. It's deeply romanticized in the film Brown Sugar, right? And there are two moments that come out of that film. There's that question that becomes the mantra for a generation. When did you first fall in love with hip hop? And then there's another moment when, in answer to that question, the lead, who is a female hip hop journalist, beautifully played by Sanaa Lathan, she recalls being a child on a Bronx playground watching a rap battle, right? And she can't get through. It's Daddy, it's Dana Dane, it's Slick Rick, and she can't see. There are too many people in the way. There's a child, a boy, who becomes her love interest, her champion, her best friend. He waves her over, invites her to stand on the bench beside her. In essence, he's inviting her to share his platform. And as I watched On the Record, I just could not help but think about your experiences running in sharp contrast to that scene. And Sheri Sher, it's clear that you and Drew both entered into the genre as talents, as true devotees, and you believe that hip hop was a meritocracy. So, what gave you the idea that it operated as such to begin with? And how have you come to terms with the contradiction that utopia that we all envisioned? I'm a contemporary, I know it, I lived it with you all. How did you come to terms with that utopia that we all lived and envisioned and danced to, that it did not exist? It promoted and then negated our voices.
Well, for me, I'm from the Bronx, born and raised. I came from a single parent, mom of 11, and we lived in the deep South Bronx, where the Bronx was considered like the third world country. At that time, I didn't have no mentors. I was a teenager, and I just took to the streets because there was so much stress at home, you know, like my mom lived from pillow to post, and I just took to the streets. And as a young Black female, I didn't know what I was looking for, but I just felt that I had to get away from the stresses at home because I was a young child. I had to take on adult responsibilities. So for me, going out in the street at such an early age, and I ended up meeting three amazing women, which was such like me. We was all from the Bronx, but they was from Webster Projects, and I was from the South Bronx, but we met up. And we used to go to Boston Road and Webster Projects, and we used to sing Grandmaster Flash, Zulu, everybody out there. And Sharrock was the female out there. And I was friends with her because we went to the same school. And so I used to see people like that. And for us, we just was like, why is no all women group? And we were young teenage girls at that time, and I was 15. I was determined to do something, to be something, even though my mother thought the difference, that I was going to be on drugs, the stereotypical thing for a young Black girl growing up in that environment. And I used to just go out there and discovered hip hop. And my whole thing was, we decided like, yo, we should start our own female group because there's no women out there to go up against the men. So to me, that was my drive. It was no money then. It was just like, okay, we're gonna go up against the guys. And so we end up starting an all-female group, which started with 2 female DJs and 4 female rappers. And then we had Trevor, that was the action for crew, the roster crew, and they was like, we're gonna back y'all. And they was at the theater on the manager. And but we had got our rep up before that. So we used to rock our sweatshirts, Mercedes ladies, and we used to go through parties, but our name became so famous because we used to just come in there with our own style. And if you listen to a lot of the records back then, Grandmaster Cash and Grandmaster Wizard, you hear Mercedes, young ladies, they was talking about us. So we started getting hood famous. And then when we got Trevor to give us the equipment, and we used to carry our own equipment, and we just decided to go and take on an all-male arena as the females. And for me, it was nothing, no money, no nothing. We carried our own crates. I come from a mom with 11 kids. I didn't never see no mentors. As you know, for me, the Black women in my family was strong, but they was just going through so much. And I was like, it got to be more than this to life. So I was born with something, I didn't know what. And that's what I ended up doing, was starting a female crew. And for me, when I got on the mic and we got on the turntables, it was a way for me to express and feel good and express what I was going through in my hood, or what I was going through as a young Black female on the mic. And it was no money involved and nothing like that. But to me, it was just a way of expressing myself. And that's what hip hop in the Bronx was about when it all first started. We just came together. Nobody was getting money. We didn't know where it was going, but it was a way for you to get on that mic and express. It's like a jungle sometime, where it just was our way of expressing something. And never did I once imagine where this was going to go. So my drive, I used to come home and get beatings, but the love for hip hop outweighed the pain from the beatings, because my mother had 11 kids, so I know she would never come look for me. But I took to the streets, and hip hop was a way for me as a woman empowerment, like, yeah, we girls and we out there and we battling them in. So to me, it was a way for me to get away from the stresses and the reality that I was born into and see and just do something, but didn't know where it was going. So if that explains to you, that was my way of getting into, that's how hip hop started with the, you know, I never knew I would start the first all female DJ rap group in hip hop history, but yeah.
I would say for me, you know, I believed naively that if I added value, if I could make hits in a capitalist framework, it was a business. I understood that it was a business. I would be rewarded and given more opportunities to make records that I loved. I loved the art, I loved the music, I loved the culture, but I understood also I had a knack, I believed, which turned out to be true, to make cool records that were also commercial. I figured out how to thread that needle. I had a sense that I could do that. And I believed that if I did that, then the other sort of superficial difficulty I faced as a woman in a predominantly male environment, and as a woman in an environment that was tougher than the environment that I'd come from academically, that it would sort of surmount those difficulties. I also, just in reflecting on your question, you know, my mom had just been elected the first Black female mayor of a major city. She was the mayor of Washington, D.C. when I got here in 1992. And I'd worked on her campaign and I'd knocked on doors, and she was an unlikely success story. I'd grown up knocking on doors for my father in D.C., a predominantly Black city. So one, I always saw it as my mission, my purpose on earth, to try to figure out how to move Black people forward. That was literally our family purpose. We were always in the middle of a campaign or preparing for a campaign in a predominantly Black city. And, you know, I would toggle from private school Monday through Friday to like electric slides, block parties, knocking on doors on the weekend. So I wasn't afraid of the sort of the superficial difficulty of being a woman in a tough environment. And I didn't want to complain. I didn't want to give anyone an excuse to say that I had no business in this industry in the first place. So when I was met with pushback or coarse language or locker room talk or misogyny, I thought, okay, I expected that. I understand that. But if I can just survive and have a thick enough skin and make a hit, and maybe make a couple of them, and maybe make some hits that reflect my values, if I can add my voice as someone who loves hip hop, but who's a woman who respects herself, if I can be that person in the room, then I will ultimately earn my seat at this table and be seen and respected. And what I didn't understand, there were a couple of things I didn't understand in 1992. I was 21 years old. I conflated Black liberation and Black upward mobility. I thought that people who pursued Black upward mobility were, by definition, people who pursued the liberation of Black people. I assumed that Russell Simmons was a crusader for our race because he put out Public Enemy, Fight the Power. I didn't understand at the end of the day, Russell Simmons was serving Russell Simmons. I believed in him. I believed he was a king for us as a people, who was defiant, who wasn't playing the respectability politics game. You have to realize this was the era of the Cosby Show, and I was supposed to be a Cosby kid based on my resume. And I wanted to reject that respectability politics game and support a less sort of diluted version of Blackness and Black swagger and Black audacity and power. And so I just believed if I could hang in there and weather what I thought naively was superficial, toxic language and slightly, although I realize now it was more than slightly inappropriate behavior, long enough to get on the scoreboard with a win, that the sea would part, I would be welcomed with open arms, and I would be able to sit at that table with Russell and Puffy and Andre Harrell and all those guys who I knew, and they would always ask me my opinion on records. I just had to get a hit on the board. And that is not what happened. And that is part of why I was so blindsided that the night that Russell Simmons was congratulating me for having a #1 album and said he would order me a car precisely because I was now an important executive at Polygram, the parent company. Like, even the white folks have heard of you now, Drew. I'm gonna just be honest. I was like, oh, wow. Like, I'm really graduating to the next level. I let my guard down because I thought I had cleared the hurdle. I naively believed that was the hurdle. I didn't understand that as long as I was a woman, there was nothing I could do. There were no amount of hit records I could make that would take my sexuality out of play, that would de-objectify me as a Black woman in this space where Black men, in particular these two very powerful Black men in my case, understood that however white adjacent I may appear, I'm not white. I don't secretly have a white person get out of jail free card. I don't have it. I may look a little something, something kind of adjacent to that ideal that they fetishize with their own anti-Blackness, which is part of why the women in this film skew light skin. That's partly because, yes, we have a more privilege. We're safer than Sandra Bland, so we can maybe stick our necks out. But on the other hand, we were selected by this predator because of how we look. So in any case, I was naive. I thought if I showed up and I delivered, I would be safe. That's why I let my guard down. And that is how I ended up sitting here today with you guys having this conversation.
Well, it seems that you were at the height of your power in that moment, being congratulated. You had the show, that soundtrack. It was everything for hip hop. It mainstreamed the form, climbing the charts as it did. So it seems that for you, Drew, and for Sheri, you were there, right? At the moment where you break through, where you feel that your hard work has been recognized, that it has nothing to do with gender, race, light skin privilege, dark skin, disenfranchisement, anything. Is what you did to get there. And it is particularly hurtful and ironic that it is in that moment when you are most human, right? You've reached the heights of your budding humanity, your actualization. That's the moment when you're most deeply vulnerable. You're objectified. I think that almost as punishment for exhibiting such audacity. And there's a language that runs through the film that was really difficult for me to hear. And that's that moment when you said that you felt like nothing about you mattered and that you were simply a physical device. And Sil Lai had kind of similar language. She said that she felt like she was a chew toy for powerful men. And Sheri, you had to reevaluate and come back to your worth. Once you're kind of broken down to that object only, it's a very painful place. And I think it's one that Dr. Joan Morgan speaks of when she says that we have to find that place as Black women to accept an ideology where we can continue to love ourselves, right? Be ourselves in our fullness, and also love the brothers who hurt us without letting race loyalty buy us early tombstones. So that kind of social death, that psychic death, Drew, you spoke about it recently on Wolfer as being a part of the disappeared. There are a number of Black women out there in this industry who were right there where you were, establishing themselves, blazing a path one minute, and they're gone the next. How many of the disappeared do you think are out there? Black women, journalists, producers, stylists, artists. How many are out there feeling left out of Me Too, concerned with being disloyal and further victimized? Where are they? How do we reach them? How do we give them voice? And how do we turn this hashtag protect Black women into a full-on practice, policy, movement?
Well, I think that people in positions of power in the Black community, in the broader community, which is why allies are so important. And I know that word is sort of maybe fallen out of favor, but to me, it's exactly why we're still here, why this film survived, why this film got made. And I want to just quickly go back to something from the earlier part of the conversation. Amy and Kirby are too modest when they talk about how patient they were with me as a subject. I didn't sign the release for well over a year. I went through months on end where I would not only not allow cameras to come over, I wouldn't return their texts. And if I did, I was unkind. I was terrified of their white gaze, absolutely terrified of their white gaze, and terrified of being misunderstood or mishandled in spite of their good intentions. And I wasn't even sure I could trust their intentions. I didn't know who I could trust. And so part of what was breathtaking for me in seeing the film for the first time, which was after it was already on its way to Sundance, was the way so much of that back and forth, so much of that tension, so much of that discomfort, so many of those difficult exchanges emerge in the film. You know, their curiosity as investigative journalists led them to take our tense exchanges. I'm talking showdowns, okay, like storming out of restaurants. Like really, I was terrified. I was really terrified. And their commitment to kind of decentering themselves is part of why this film so, I think, delicately and respectfully examines the underlying double bind and the fear. And then they got literally the world's greatest possible executive producer, from my standpoint at the time, Oprah Winfrey, a survivor, an artist, a champion, a Black woman who's defied every odd to become one of the most powerful people in the world, who then helped to further shape the film that we've all seen now, was such a testament to their sincerity in terms of wanting to yield the space for us to show up and talk about the double bind. So I've now gotten way off of the topic of the double bind. But yes, it is a debilitating fear to go against your own community. I love my community. I love the Black table, as it were, in the world. I loved it in college. I love it in the world. I don't want to be kicked out of the table. I love us. And I didn't want to be misunderstood as not loving us. But at a certain point, it occurred to me, I'm a mother now. I'm raising a Black daughter and a Black son. And I want to break the cycle for them. And it occurred to me that it was just as important for me to love myself and Sheri and Sil Lai and Jenny and every other Black woman who's been harmed and silenced, because there's this message that the importance of protecting our men who walk around with targets on their back, to be clear, who are falsely accused of sexual violence, to be clear, who are falsely accused of violence by Skittle. Okay, like our men get accused of violence by like literally everything. So you know that, and you don't want to contribute to that, and you don't want to say something that creates a headline that makes an innocent Black man or boy that much more likely to be vilified and perceived as dangerous. But what about us? You know, what about Black women? What about Black women and girls? What about the enslaved Black girls, not women? The average age of the Black woman who was enslaved in the Atlantic slave trade was 15. That's a 10th grader. A 10th grader. And they were all raped. They were all raped. And they weren't raped by sadistic rapists. They were raped by traders who understood that if they got them pregnant, they increased the underlying value of the asset. That is the story of Black women and girls in this country. We lost our bodily autonomy in 1619, and we still haven't gotten it back. And I want to break the cycle for my daughter and everyone's son too. That's why this is important. It occurred to me, I'm grown now, that my fear of being blackballed and sidelined was less important than breaking this cycle and having this conversation. I'm so grateful to you guys that you're continuing this conversation right now.
Yeah.
Sheri, thank you for that, Drew. Sheri, how many are disappeared? How long were you silenced? I mean, Drew was looking at 22 years that she stepped away.
Well, my whole thing is when this happened to me, my mom had trust Russell. He came into my home and met my mom, and seeing she was a single parent. And that part right there was an integral part of my life, because my mother didn't believe in hip hop. She didn't know what I was out there doing. She just knew I was hanging in the streets, and she didn't know what was hip hop. Was it a gang, you know? And so I caught a lot of ridicule, and I used to think my mother didn't love me. So I went to the streets because the love I was being shown was through hip hop. And coming up, I was always taught, especially coming from the Bronx, how women of color protected the men. And as you growing up in the Bronx and you seeing men of color being brought down, not only economically, but through the system, and how they're always suppressed. And so hip hop was a part, to me, was like a blessing, because it was something that we was able to get on the mic and say what was really going on with our lives. And so I was always taught to, in the Bronx, you had to be silent. Whatever happened there, it stayed there, because how dare me come out and out a Black man that took hip hop to a major stream. So when I came out, I mean, when this happened to me, I knew nobody else that he did this to. And then at that time, he was bringing hip hop to a major stream. And then I'm started the first female hip hop group going against the men. So and then my mother trusted him with us, and we was going in the studio making this record, and, you know, and I was like, I had to keep this silent, but the whole thing about it is keeping it silent. I was protecting hip hop. I was sticking to the culture of no snitching. So we're talking about 30 something years. When I decided to write my book in 2007, which Vibe magazine and Keniston merged, and that's when they did the Biggie Smalls book. I was in Hip Hop Divas, and I am Mercedes Ladies had broke up at that time, and I said, no, our story have to be told. It was amazing. I said, our story have to be told. How us 6 girls from nothing came and ended up paving the way. And even though there was no monetary gain, the story to me had to be told. So I always kept a diary. So when I was featured in Hip Hop Divas, which was the book about with Mary J. Blige, Missy Elliott, they had said, Sheri, will you come and do an article about Mercedes Ladies? So I was like, okay. And then I was in Stress magazine, but I was telling about our journey. And then that's when I met Rob Kenner and stuff. And I say, hey, I have a diary that I always kept. So when my book was being done, I showed it to them. I was Mimi Valdez at the time, Kennard Gibbs and all of them. And it's like, well, we have to see. And when they read they said, you have to finish. And I was like, I ain't go to college. I'm a street girl. You know, I never went to college. And I don't know about that. Don't you got people that went to college and know all of this expertise? They said, no, the way you told your story, it was like we was there living it. So then I got my book published, but the thing that was on the table was, did you want to take your book and use it to blow Russell up? Because remember, they had the original of what I wrote. Or do you want it to be a novel based on a true story? And that's something I had to live with. And even my sister or the people that knew what he did to me. And there was like, you bugging, like blow him up. At that time, he had Fat Farm. And I was like, no, if I blow him up, then it's going to take away of my dream and my journey about Mercedes Ladies. And I didn't want the book to be focused on a victim of Russell Simmons. I wanted to be focused on 6 amazing women that came from nothing in single parent home, how we paved the way. So I had to add on the table, and I had to make that decision. I made it to be based on a true story, a novel. And the part with him and there, the title of that chapter was "Who's Gonna Believe Me?" And so most people knew who I was talking about that was in that era. So I came out with my book, but it was also a fear that everything I'd done and everything I did since I was 15 years old was going to be blocked because he was powerful. And so when my book came out, I did the college tour and I was doing my thing because my whole thing was I grew up, my mom taught us not to cry. I came home from school and used to see eviction notices there, and we took to the streets. I used to get beatings when I came home because my mother thought I was out there doing drugs and stuff. I couldn't cry. So I learned from my mother practice and all of my siblings. We grew up rough. We grew up with what we had. My mom did the best she can, but we couldn't cry. So I never wanted to appear that you violated me in such a crazy way. And I knew nobody else you did this to. And I had to keep that secret because I didn't think I thought I was going to have the backlash from the hip hop community, which was mostly of men. And then I was going to not have no support because I didn't know nobody else he ever did this to. So when I did my book, I did it. And I never thought in a million years. And before my mom died, she was like, don't worry, he's going to take a life of his own. And she was very hurt because she trusted Russell with us, you know? And so when the book came out, it was based on a true story novel. I did run into Russell and he's like, oh yeah, I know you got a book out and I'm quite sure some shit in there. And I said, how lucky are you? And so my book came out. So my whole drive was, because I always was taught not to cry and to be so strong, and coming from the Bronx and a young Black woman and stuff I've seen and been through, I was taught to be very strong. And I thought when you cried, it was a sign of weakness. So I kept that. And then 2017, when all these women came out, and then I got phone calls from people who knew that I kept my story. It was like, Sheri, it's your time now. And I got on there and it was just like, I was just caught in like an animated, like, I couldn't believe this. I knew nobody else he did this. Now all these women are coming out. And then that's when I came out in the LA Times in 2017 with my story. And then it came out, and then it was very challenging because it was like people coming at you. And I did not get no really support from my Black community or my hip hop culture. And that, like, it was like, oh, you just want money. And then, you know, I had so many times to blow him up and everybody knew that. And I didn't. Because I did not want him to think he won and brought me down. Like, I wanted to be like, I'm not, you victimized me, but I'm not a victim. I'm a victor. I still got my book published. I'm standing strong because I'm that strong Black woman. That's how I was raised from my mom, my grandma, and them. Single women raising kids. I was raised that way. So when that came out in 2017, that's when I was on the Megyn Kelly show and all of that. And I thought in my mind, like, these women are not lying. And this happened to me years ago, and I indicated it in my book. And I have to come out and tell the truth because he is like this. And that was years that I kept that secret, but it was indicated in my book. So I felt that I had to come out with my story because these women wasn't lying. And the backlash I got coming out from my story was like, oh, you wanted money. And I'm like, even though I was doing Mercedes Ladies published the book, I was working 2 jobs. I never was that type. I was a hustler since I was 14. And if I wanted to, at the time when he was at his prime, I could have blew him up. But that's not what my community was seeing. So after that, that's when my sister had contacted me, and you know, she says it's a survivor, Drew, who wanted to get in contact with you because Drew was in the New York Times, but I was in LA Times. But me and her met up, and you know, we shared stories and how it was like to just come out with it, how it was affecting us, and you know, we just shared alike. And I met her, and that's when she was telling me about a documentary that she was doing, you know, with some people in LA, and you know, was I interested? And I had mixed feelings about that because it was like I felt exposed because I don't like to feel vulnerable. I didn't want to be known as an accuser of Russell Simmons because I'm more than that. You know, I wrote the first female hip hop novel ever published. I paved the way for the hip hop and females is starting to, you know, I'm in history, like I'm a legend, and I didn't want to be looked at as some poor victim that accusing Russell and I'm just trying to get shine. So it really was an emotional roller coaster for me. And that's something I held in my over 30 something years. And so it was very mixed emotions coming out, but it was never a secret because everybody knew. But it just was me wanting to have that persona as that strong woman and didn't want to think that you got me, like you deaded me. No, I was born with talent. I was born with a gift. And it was just that thing of my pride and still standing strong. And when you see me, I'm not folding. But then I was really realizing I was doing an injustice to myself and my growth and hiding my God gives talent. And I knew facing this giant and letting go of that fear and letting go, it just gave me a freedom to be who I really am and who I'm meant to be. So it was very much of a roller coaster. And even on the film, I never cry in front of nobody, and my whole family know that. So to see me crying on there, I was like very showing my vulnerability to the world took a lot out of me because I was such a strong person because I was born and was raised that way. So it took a lot for me to come forward. It took a lot for me to be a part of that documentary. And it was just something I guess that I needed to heal from, and I needed that to come out, and I needed to see myself like that.
I just want to try one time to properly answer your how many people are out there question. If my Twitter and Instagram DMs in the weeks after the New York Times article came out are any indication, and my Twitter and Instagram DMs after the film came out in May, it's just breathtaking. The number of survivors that are out there in the industry, but beyond the industry. And also, I think of the door at the end of the Titanic and how I kept trying to stay on that door in my career. And in order to stay on the door at the end of the Titanic, I would have needed somebody, some man, to pull me on and keep me on. And I did for 4.5 years have Clive Davis, who held me on sort of the floating door. But I felt like I was ready to kind of outgrow Clive. He went to J Records. I'd had so many hits. I'd known Ella Reid for 10 years. Almost 10 years, he'd always been respectful, and I thought he was extending a hand to me. And then what I ultimately realized, it's just like racism, right? You need somebody white sometimes to pull you into the room where it happens, where the checks get cut, where the opportunities are. It's the same for women. You need a man to pull you into the room where it happens. And every time I thought I was getting pulled into the room where it happens, there was a price. There was a quid pro quo, there was an expectation. And so I could never stay on the door. And I finally just let go and sank to the bottom of the ocean. There are so many of us.
That comes through, that you're holding on, you're pushing against that current, and you're still bringing the best of yourself to it, even as you're struggling not to go under. And Sheri, it was very apparent that your strength came through, and yet it was time for it to break a little bit so that you could heal and be seen again.
And also be a blessing to others, you know, as in the hip hop culture, I like, you see now as people ask me, well, what do you think about the women in the hip hop culture? You think they're experiencing the same thing? And I'm quite sure it's always a position that I was in, because it's like, was ran by men, the hip hop culture. So women, you know, well, especially now, it's money involved. So do you come out and expose these men, or do you, you know, compromise yourself or whatever? And, you know, you're making this money where it could feed you and your family and stuff. So it's probably quite like back then with me, it wasn't no money. It was just a thing of Bronx, and you had to keep that code of the Bronx. But right now it's money involved. So when women do reach out to me, but it's women, you know, that it's not even in the culture, it's just they felt they wasn't important enough to come out, and that there was nobody. And I can relate to that, because I didn't feel I was important enough, because I didn't have no kind of status behind me. I just was like from the gutter street, but in a way that I was out there paving the way. So I have women that is in a status that they don't think they're important enough to come out, and nobody's gonna even want to care about this story. And so I deal with that. And women that's in the hip hop game right now, people say, well, what do you think about them? But it's so much money involved in it now. It's very tricky, and for them to come out, maybe they thinking that they would end up blowing a career, because you're talking about, this is a thing where we all had talent and still have talent. And even looking at Drew and learning her background, and we're talented women of color, but in a way we have to play our position in order to get ahead in a position of a culture that it's you don't feel like you're going to be supported from, and the backlash you're going to get from it is something you had to do, or some way you had to do. Oh, you know what you was doing. And that's the kind of feedback when you're in that culture and you're a woman of color.
You know, I think what both of you are speaking to, and I mean, you're speaking to so many different things, but when, you know, Drew mentioned the transatlantic slave trade and like, you know, what happened to young girls, women. And I have to say, like, there was this, the moment that we went there, that we went to Africa, the shores of the Atlantic in the film, you know, I have always found it chilling to consider how enslaved women had no control over their bodies or their sexual experiences. But I hadn't heard or learned about the punishment of African men who tried to defend the women. And that moment of the scratch marks on the wall, it was so intense, and it just sort of rippled through me, this like kind of awareness that these men were trained that defending women would likely maybe end up in their own deaths. And it very clearly illustrates that this structure was created where a Black woman could be doubly violated in the American culture, you know, by the white slave traders and slave owners. And the Black enslaved men were sort of taught that, or sort of given this permission not to protect their women, or
also acclimating to it. I mean,
yeah. And so the dynamic that ensued was that, like, the Black men at the very least could be liberated from perhaps their urge to protect Black women, but at worst violate and abuse Black women themselves. And it so directly connects to the modern experience that the two of you and Sil Lai and the other women in the film describe. And I'm curious to know your thoughts about, like, the healing the Black man from this trauma alongside the Black woman, right? Because the challenge for the Black woman in that healing process is that it has to include both in a way.
Well, I mean, I think one of the most sort of powerful acts of Black liberation would be to protect Black women, because that was at the core of what we lost in 1619 and then ever onwards. And if we can sort of fuse, integrate that male-female dynamic, not just romantically, just in general, as a partnership, if we can have reciprocity, to quote Miss Lauryn Hill, I truly believe on some level that's the cheat code that would begin to strengthen us so that we really have some endurance and some capacity. Black women do so much heavy lifting for everybody else. We are out there on the front lines of the Black liberation movement. Black Lives Matter. The main founders of that are Black women. You know, we can talk about Rosa Parks and the sister who preceded her. You know, we can go back and we can go on and on about 98% of us voted for Biden, and something similar voted for Hillary, and we were the firewall for against Roy Moore in Alabama. Stacey Abrams, we don't play, but who shows us reciprocity? And so I believe this isn't just about me personally or my feelings being hurt, and my feelings have been hurt by disappointments, as documented in this film from my brothers, for sure. But it's bigger than me. I think for us as Black people, if Black men could be reciprocal and support us, I think that would put the wind at our backs. I really believe it.
Yeah.
It would, that's really deep, and I learned more about it even being in this film, and through, like, even what Drew had brought out about that, it was a lot that I learned, you know, of history. And I'm not gonna lie that I was not really so totally, you know, you hear stories from your grandma enough, but as deep and she went into it, it was really like impelling, and I was like, wow. But as of today, how would you be able to heal the Black men? And healing comes from a lot of times, and I have, you know, brothers and guys I hang out, they pride and stuff won't let them come out and say, hey, I need help. I'm sick. And you have to understand, if you're talking about somebody that is a predator or something like that, which is really is no color, it's a sick mind. And so when we're talking something like that and trying to heal some of these men and try to come forth where we could come together and we're just doing healing, that's going to take a lot, because to some, it's going to be their pride, and it's going to be admitting I have a problem. And that goes with anything in mental health, that goes with anything with drug abuse, that goes through a lot of different categories in life. So for men, and men that I grew up around, and strong Black men I grew up around, it was more of their pride and them not coming out to admit that they have a problem. You know what I'm saying? Because to them, that would means that they're weak. And to them, that means somebody's going to take advantage of their weakness. So how do we come together and be a healing to each other, and to be able to be a powerful as one? That's the big question. How can we get to them? Because also men have the bro code, where they know certain things are going on with they bro or whoever they're hanging out with, and to be accepted into that clique, how dare they come out and tell them what you're doing is wrong? It's just not the breed. That's just not the way the code goes. And so it's breaking that code. It's what do you do that they have to feel a certain way, that it's okay to say, I got a problem. It's okay to say, I need some healing in some areas. And that's the whole big thing, and the whole big question, and the whole big problem, that it's going to take something, because it's just something that's not going to come easy.
I think one thing that's key is talking about it and
Yeah.
not enabling it, and not coddling rapists, not having Russell Simmons on the Breakfast Club, not just because that was hurtful to me and Sheri and Sil Lai and Jenny and all of the survivors who he maligned without being checked on that show. When you do that, when you give him a platform and you give the Breakfast Club cover for giving him a platform, you're not just creating another generation of Drew Dixons and Jenny Lumet's and Sheri Sher and Sil Lai's who will be derailed. You're creating more Russell Simmons. You're creating more R. Kellys. You're creating more Michael Jacksons and Bill Cosby's, brilliant, genius talents that we need. We need these men to succeed. We need them to survive. We need them to thrive and not be cut off because some perversion that they've cultivated because they were abused and they saw Russell Simmons on the Breakfast Club and it was emulated then in their lives. And then they become predators and then they fall from the sky like Icarus. I don't want R. Kelly to fall from the sky again in 20 years. I don't want another Michael Jackson with that amount of genius to have a perversion that makes him fall from the sky any more than I want another Drew Dixon or another Sheri Sher to be undermined. We cannot afford to keep undermining ourselves. We cannot self-immolate our own talent by letting this toxic behavior persist. And so we cannot give them safe harbor because we are creating another generation of not just survivors, but of predators. And it is hurting us as a society.
Thank you for that. It looks like we have our own systemic work to do as Black men and women together. And I look forward to you all being the way breakers and way showers in that. And I think, Marianne, we are going to sign off.
Yeah,
and I think
this has been an incredible evening, and I feel just so really honored to be in this conversation with the two of you, and with Amy and Kirby, and of course with Erica. So thanks for showing up and keeping on showing up for us in this way.
And thanks for HBO Max for giving us that platform. Thanks for Amy and Dick for even taking that chance and exposing this. And thanks for PEN America, you know, for platforms like this, and for letting us, you know, feel that we're not alone, and you know, we have this platform to really say what's really going on, because this is real, and it's just going to create a generation and a generation until, you know, by this happening in these platforms, I think it's giving more people a conscience and to think and more understand what's really going on. And it's not about idolizing people, but it's about what's real, because you never know when your child or your daughter or your sister that you're not going to always be able there to protect, be in these situations. And not just women, it's men that also be violated and they scared to come out. So, you know, this forum, I hope through my story, at least, or the story that from everybody else, and we all from different walks of life, that it shows that, you know, you are important enough and your voice does matter, and you need to take your power back. And taking your power back is facing that giant in your fear.
And thank you, Amy and Kirby and HBO Max for sticking with this film. Even when we lost our executive producer, which was terrifying. Thank you for holding on to us and to this film, and for holding this space, no matter what, even when it got really hard.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Thank y'all.
All right.
And thank you, Mara. Y'all was great. Made me feel comfortable, because I get nervous talking, and so you made it so comfortable. But thank you.
I wish we could all be in the same room together, but I'm really grateful we have the technology to come together in this
way. Absolutely.
Much love to all of y'all. Thank y'all.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Good night, everyone. And thank you, all the listeners that tuned in. Thank you for the support.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye.